Hey, what's going on, guys? So yesterday I was talking about cardio, and today I want to talk about the differences, the positives, and the negatives about two different types of cardio. That's high intensity training, or also called high intensity interval training or HIIT training, and steady state training. Now, what's the difference between the two? How are they defined? Well, high intensity training or high intensity interval training is normally short bursts of really intense exercise followed by short periods of rest over a given period of time. So when we do those, we think of Tabata circuits. Tabata circuits are 20 seconds of really intense exercise followed by 10 seconds of rest done for about 4 minutes. Right? Or we can think of CrossFit WODs. A lot of different CrossFit WODs are based on high intensity training. We could also think of sprints. Doing sprints is a type of high intensity training. And also playing certain sports. If you're doing jujitsu and you're rolling around for intense periods of time and then resting for a little bit, that could also be considered a form of high intensity training. And there's a lot of different ways you could do high intensity training. Typically they involve pieces of equipment or they'll involve calisthenics exercises, but things that you can do at a really, really intense pace for a short period of time. When we're talking about steady state training, we're talking about doing a single exercise for a really long period of time. So this is what we traditionally think of when we think of cardio, right? So cardio decks with step mills on them, treadmills, ellipticals. We also think of long distance running. That's another type of steady state training. Rucking, if you're in the military, if you're rucking around with heavy packs, that's another type of steady state training. I do a lot of long distance weighted carries with my kettlebell, and I include those, and those are steady training. But over the past few years, people who advocate for one or the other, they tend to demonize the other side. So people who are really, really into high intensity training, they'll tend to talk about long distance steady state training like it's poison. Right, and then vice versa, the people who are really, really into steady training, they'll talk about the stupidity of doing high intensity interval training. Now, here's the thing: both types of cardio are effective. Both of them have specific types of benefits, and both of them have specific kinds of negatives. I'll give you the negatives first. When we're talking about steady state training, one of the big negatives here is that the human body is a very, very adaptable machine. Now, if you think back to how we evolved from being hunter-gatherers, when food was scarce, we had to move long distances. That meant that at times, the only fuel source we had were our own fat stores. Now, that's great because it allows us to leverage ketosis today to help us to burn fat. But if you're doing a lot of steady state training and you are moving long distances, what happens is your body actually gets much better gas mileage. It stops burning as much fuel because it gets more efficient at the exercise. So if you're doing a single exercise for a steady state over a long period of time, your body actually is very good at getting efficient at that exercise so that it burns less energy while it's doing that. So this could be a problem for those of you who are actually trying to burn fat. And for women in particular, your thyroids actually tend to slow down a lot more quickly than men's do. And I've known a lot of women who've gone into hypothyroidism when they've started training for 5Ks or marathons. And I've actually known women who've put on body fat when they were training for marathons and actually finished up the marathon training heavier than they did before they started doing the marathons. And that's something really to consider. The other thing about steady state training is that there is potential for damage to the heart, right? So when we think back to the 1990s, a lot of triathletes were actually dropping like flies from a combination of factors stemming from poor diets. They were consuming really, really carb heavy diets at the time, and not just like a moderate level of carbohydrates, like tons and tons of carbohydrates, suffering from high levels of inflammation. And because they were just doing steady state training at a single pace, their hearts, different ventricles of their hearts were actually getting damaged. And so we saw a lot of triathletes and endurance athletes back in the 90s suffering from heart attacks and suffering from heart failure, and dropping dead. And cardiac arrest. So many bad things were happening back then. Now, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm not saying that. This is not me saying that carbs were bad. I'm saying that they were on very, very high calorie, carb heavy diets that were causing inflammation and causing these issues in conjunction with their training. But on the high intensity training side, there's also some negatives there too. There's higher risk of injury. If you're not used to doing exercise at a really, really intense pace, particularly those types of exercises like within CrossFit that involve, lifting a barbell like 30 repetitions for a given set period of time. If you're not properly trained to do this, then there's definitely a higher risk of injury there. There's also a danger that if you're a beginner, you're not going to be able to do the exercise at a level that's intense enough that's going to allow you to burn enough calories during that session, create the oxygen deficit to burn calories throughout the day so that you can burn fat. So there's a danger there for beginners in not being able to do the exercise intense enough and potentially getting frustrated and not wanting to do cardio anymore. These are just things that people have brought up as far as negatives about it. I do both. I do both steady state training and I do high intensity interval training. And there's a big reason why I do both. And that's because with everything I do with my program, I try to seek variation, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, don't do the same type of thing every day. So I don't recommend doing high intensity training every single day because you're going to have a problem with recovery. And I don't recommend doing steady state training every single day because of the negative implications of doing steady state training every single day. So what I tend to do is I will do steady training 3 days a week. And I'll do usually on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I'll either do a run or I will do a ruck or I will do a loaded carry and walk with 55-pound kettlebell on my shoulder for 2 to 3 miles sometimes. My runs tend to be around 45 miles. If I'm doing a ruck, it could be potentially a little bit longer than that, sometimes like 6-7 miles. I like to keep myself conditioned in that way. It's also a really good break for me. I love being outside. I love getting out there in the fresh air, and I love listening to podcasts while I do it. So I'm a little bit of a steady cardio addict, but I have to keep myself to only doing it 3 days a week. If you're doing it 3 days a week and you're not doing it all the time, there's going to be less possibility of that type of damage that I was speaking about earlier. High intensity training, I try to do 2 times a week, and generally it'll be kettlebell training, some sort of kettlebell complex. I'll do a lot of barbell complexes. I will do a workout where I'll try to do 100 burpees in 10 minutes. Try that. It's a killer. I'll do Tabata circuits. I'll do CrossFit WODs, things like that. But one of the things I like to do the most often is actually roll jiu-jitsu. And rolling jiu-jitsu or doing martial arts or sparring, things like that, they can be great ways of getting some high-intensity cardio in. Now, this also depends on what level you're at. I'm still a beginner, but I like to be very active. I don't like to try to kill myself or be one of those wild men on the mat. Sometimes I like to take it a little bit slower with jiu-jitsu and just kind of learn and learn from the higher belts that I'm rolling with. And sometimes it's not that big of a workout. Sometimes it's just a learning process. But by and large, whenever I'm coming back from jiu-jitsu practice, I'm pretty worn out. And so I'll utilize that as a high-intensity training session. And if you practice a sport like that, that could be a good opportunity to get high-intensity training in a couple of times a week. With everything else, I think that about covers it. So 3 days a week where I'm doing steady state training, 2 days a week where I'm doing high intensity training. The big factor here is this: vary it up. Don't seek to do the same movement patterns all the time. Even if you're doing high intensity training and you're constantly just doing kettlebell swings, or if you're constantly just doing, kettlebell squats or goblet squats or things like that, for your high intensity interval training, then try to vary it up. Try to do sprints sometimes. Try to do burpees sometimes. Try to do Tabata circuits where you're combining a bunch of different kettlebell movements or a bunch of different barbell movements or a bunch of different calisthenics. Really, really great benefit from seeking that kind of variation, both for fat burning, both for recovery, and for your health, and keeping your heart healthy and keeping your heart rate variability as high as possible. So with that, if you guys have any questions, hit me up. I'm going to put an article below. It's a tactical training article where I actually go through a bunch of different high intensity interval training workouts, and I talk about the benefits of combining steady state and high intensity training. So check that article below. If you're looking to learn more about the power of ketosis and mobilizing your own fat stores for fuel, check out my free course that's going on right now. It's on starting keto, and it's at www.startketoright.com, giving away a whole bunch of free resources with that, like a cookbook, grocery list, training programs, things like that. You'll get so much out of it, and it's completely free. With that, guys, I will talk to you guys later this week, and I'll talk to you soon.